I'm Austin.
I'm Mike.
We are the test drivers.
And we put tech through its paces.
Goodbye embargoes, because this is the Test Drivers Exposed episode.
You're free. You've been released, no longer held down by big Google, and you can say whatever you want.
The man can't censor me now. Okay, well, in some ways they can't. But no, it feels free. I feel like last episode, every word that came out of my mouth, I was like second guessing, like, can I say this? Maybe not. I'm just going to say it anyway. The Test Drivers audience are cool, right? Y'all aren't going to tattle on me, right?
Rat you out. I don't know. Maybe they did. You'll find out if you get the next Google Pixel 7 Pro.
Some dude in a suit's about to knock on my door like, well, 37 minutes in the Test Drivers podcast. You mentioned a spec that was outside the embargo. I don't know, man. I don't know.
So yeah, later on in the episode today, we are going to finish off your thoughts on the new Pixel phones. So we can talk about camera and performance and all that kind of stuff, which I'm excited about. We are as well, like we were talking about this before we started recording today. I feel like we're kind of reaching towards the end of new tech for the year.
Yeah, it feels like it has been a marathon. Like
big one.
It feels almost like it's been nonstop from February until now of just new stuff,
yep.
Huge rumors and everything. But now I feel like we've got a little period of calm. We get to collect ourselves. We get to look through the bountiful harvest that was 2021 as far as new technology, and then start thinking about like iPhone 17 rumors for next year or whatever.
I was going through my RSS feeds a couple of days ago, and I saw everything we know about the Apple Watch 8, and I was like, how?
Oh!
How?
Actually, it's not on our show notes. I got my Series 7 literally set up this morning, so I finally upgraded from the Series 4.
4 to 7. So this is your first always-on display, then?
It is my first always-on display. It's bright. I'm so used to for so many years.
It's pretty bright, yeah.
Yeah, of like constantly like rotating my wrist like in a very exaggerated way. Like it's just like I don't even think about it. I've just been doing that. But now I've just been like kind of casually looking down, like, oh yeah, the screen's still on. Oh yeah, the screen's still on.
Like a watch should be.
Yeah. Like every other watch. It's nice. I mean, I will freely admit the only reason I upgraded to the Series 7 was because after many years of excellent use, I somehow very severely scratched the screen on my Series 4 that I have no idea how I did it. One day I was on a shoot and I just looked down and I had this like massive scratch across the bottom third of the screen. And I was just like,
it happens.
Oh, but that was the first time I'd ever scratched an Apple Watch screen. I've never used screen protectors. I've used, the stainless steel pretty much since the beginning. I've had a few of them at this point. And just that one random day, I somehow scratched it. So if it weren't for that, I probably wouldn't have upgraded. But it is a nice upgrade. It also feels a little faster to me. I don't know. It's probably a slightly newer chip.
It should. I mean, it's only one more chip generation because they put a new chip, or maybe it's two. I think they put a new chip in the 6. They didn't in the 5, if I'm remembering rightly, because they didn't put a new chip in the 7 compared to the 6. It's got the same chip in it. I know that they've skipped that a little bit, but yeah, it's obviously the screen's bigger. What spec have you got? What case?
So I've always been on the stainless steel. I just like the silver, no anodize, or they anodize it, whatever. I would just do like the straight silver stainless steel.
Yeah.
I have the 45 millimeter, and I always just use the regular sport band. I've got the midnight band, but I always use black, gray, dark blue. I'm always just like a very neutral. I don't ever change my bands because like this watch lives its entire life on my wrist. I sleep with it. I charge it for a few minutes in the morning, a little bit at night, and then that's just what I use for everything. So I don't like to have to swap and stuff. But yeah, it's good. The larger screen is nice. And obviously I've just gotten it. I think battery life is maybe not as much of an upgrade as I was hoping since the always on display. I might turn it off. I don't know. I'll have to see.
Don't turn it off. Just get the new cable. The new fast charge cable.
I do have that. So as long as I make it comfortably through the day, I should be fine.
Mine goes through the day, like for sure. And also the Series 7 is an improvement on my Series 5 battery.
Okay, that's good.
My Series 5, I would get to the end of the day, like maybe like midnight, and it would be like, 10% time, like when it starts doing really getting upset. Now I finish the day on like 25, 30%.
Okay, that's good.
Within the first couple of days, the watch battery is always pretty bad. It's like it's setting itself up or whatever. I reckon you'll be fine. If you were coming from a Series 4, that battery would have gotten worse over that time. So I would
Yeah.
be really surprised if you didn't have better support. And then you got the fast charging anyway. When you do that top up, you'll get a much bigger
Yeah.
top up.
The problem is
So-
I have one of the, I think it's a Belkin like 3-in-1 charge dock that has the Apple Watch charger built in. But now I'm just like, oh, I like it because it's got like the little spot for your like wireless headphones and everything. But now it's just like,
Yeah.
I need to, but to be fair, I feel like we've talked about this a couple times. Ever since the pandemic, my charging setup across my entire life has been in disarray because like for months I would just steal cables. I'm like, oh, I just need this. I'll pull it out of my travel bag. Not using that anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm wrecked. I'm totally wrecked. Like if I go somewhere for the weekend and like I'm pulling cables from all over the place because I used to just have this like pouch. It had everything in. But like two things happened. I started taking a bunch of stuff out, and then some of my devices, they now have different charging.
Oh.
So we're going to talk about the MacBook Pro later on, right? Well, now I need a new brick, right? So I got a new brick that I have to take everywhere, which, it's USB-C, so I can swap it around to other stuff. But now it's like a new brick, and now I've added the MagSafe cable in because why not? And it's like, it's all changed again. And I bought this new pouch to like put all the stuff in. And I sat down a couple of days ago, I got all my chargers out, and I just gave up. I was like, I just don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. Like, I was like, what do I need? It's like, I need to really like sit down, start drawing out some diagrams, right? Like, it's a bit of a nightmare right now. I had such a good, like, this is just lives in my bag and it's always ready for when I travel. And now it's in disarray.
So I, as we were talking about briefly before the show, had a little bit of international travel last week.
Yep.
And I realized very quickly that half my cables and accessories had just disappeared. It wasn't like I just moved them. Like, I don't think they exist anymore.
They're gone.
Turned everything around. I couldn't find like half my stuff. I was just like, I don't even get it. So I feel like
it's been assimilated into other parts of your life. That's what's happened. It's just like leaked out because you're like, oh, I need this. Let me just grab it out of here. It's like a thing you'd never do, but you did it because the bag was unused for like a year or whatever.
Yeah, and like I have a little laptop, like sort of a small bag that I use sort of as my everyday carry. But I have a backpack that I use for travel, and I usually hop a few cables and a few things back and forth. But at this point, I feel like over the winter break, I'm gonna sit down and, like you said, draw the diagrams out, build a giant Amazon cart of just like, okay, I'm just gonna hit the reset button, just like I need to declare sock bankruptcy every once in a while. I need to declare cable and charger bankruptcy and just restart with these MacBooks and Apple Watch and all this kind of nonsense.
Yep. It's a bit of a mess, but I'll be keen to know how you'll what you think about the Apple Watch in the long term, because it does take a little bit of time, I think, to get used to it.
Yeah. I feel good about it so far. I mean, like I said, the Series 4 was great. Like, there was nothing that really caused me issues with it. The battery life was still decent. The fact that the always on is cool, but the watch is kind of a different thing for me in that it is much more of a utility than an actual gadget. Like, it's just something that I use. Like, I don't think about upgrading my microwave every year. I don't think about upgrading my watch every year. It's just like, oh, cool. Handful of new features, sweet. I'm just gonna keep using it.
Yeah, I actually appreciate that. It can be every few years, where I feel like I know all tech can or whatever, but the iPhone I think they do try to make it worthy year over year. Like, I know that people have different opinions on that. Totally understand it, but I think Apple does do some work to try and if you do upgrade every year, you will feel it, because a lot of people do. Like, Apple even have their own program, right? Like, you get a new phone every year, just get on the upgrade program. But I feel with the watches, there isn't so much of a benefit. They do add less, like the Series 5, just basically the only thing it had was like the screen was brighter. Sorry, the Series 6, the screen was brighter than the 5, and it brought in the O2 sensor, but that was kind of like it. And this one, it's like, hey, the screen's bigger, and like that, and it's also a little bit brighter. But like, I appreciate that. It's like more incremental, because like we don't, you don't want to feel. I feel like if people listen to the show, they're very tech focused, right? And so we always want the latest and greatest. But to have a device where you can feel more comfortable of like, I'll just do this every 2 or 3 years, I think is pretty good.
I mean, I would want to throw away a nice, expensive, mechanical watch every couple of years, right? You want some longevity, not only in the software, but just in, it's a watch. It's not something that you're just going to, use for 15 minutes and bounce on.
I will say, from like doing like this for a few years, Apple Watches really retain value on resale.
Oh, do they really? Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
so I had an Apple Watch edition, the ceramic one, and it might be
Mm.
because this watch was rare, but it was like, I don't know, say it was like £1,000 or something when it came out because it
Yeah.
was one of their special ones. I think we just sold it for like 750,
Whoa.
and that was a Series 5, so it's over 2 years
Wow.
old, and I wouldn't have expected that. So, and we've had it before. I think when we sold a Series 3 at one point, or Series 2,
Mhm.
and it retained like maybe 75% of the value after a few
Wow.
years, which is just not what I would have expected for the Apple Watch. So
No.
people do want them, and they just want a deal on them, you know?
That makes sense. Well, I'm glad that there's like long-term software support. Like, unlike, I feel like the Series Zero, whatever, had like a couple years, and they were like, okay, you spent
That
$20,000 on
was
the gold one. Well, too bad.
Yeah, the processor in that one was not so great.
So slow. It was so slow. I was on
Yeah,
that Series
yeah,
Zero for like 2 or 3 years.
yeah.
So there's also some other new Apple accessories. Have you seen the Beats Fit Pros?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of reviews come out for them. So it's like I think The Verge called them basically AirPods Pro but Beats.
Yeah, it's a decent way to describe them. So I've got a pair of them in. Okay, so I'm just going to just throw my personal biases out real quick. The case is big. It's almost a little bit closer to like the Power Beats where it has like the little like hook for your ears. And because
Uh-huh.
of that, the case is just larger. And because of that,
I see. Yep.
I always like the test for me 100% of the time if I'm going to carry around a pair of earbuds with me on a daily basis, which I do, does it fit in that little pocket in your jeans, the little mini pocket?
Mm-hmm.
And these definitely don't even come close. Like these are way too big.
This is quite a chunky case.
Mm-hmm.
Like it seems like it's about twice the depth that it needs to be to fit the mini, you know?
Yeah. And so like, okay, so that aside, they are really nice, right? So they come in at $200. They do have the active noise cancellation. Unlike the Studio Buds, they do have the Apple specific chip, whereas I believe the Studio Buds were using something a little bit more like kind of quote unquote off the shelf, which to be fair, if you are an Android user, which any of my earbuds I do kind of hop back and forth, the Studio Buds are better supported with Android. They support like Google Swift Pair or Quick Pair, whatever it's called. So there are definitely some advantages, but on the flip side, with the Fit Pro, you do have access to all the cool Apple-y bits of, handoff, you have access to the spatial audio, and they sound really quite good. As far as like fitment, I think they're pretty comfortable. They're still very lightweight, and it's not like the full hook around the outside of your ears. It just kind of goes in like that inner sort of like, I don't know what you call it. I'm sure there's some medical term. Like the inner part of your ear where it just kind of gives you a little support in addition to the buds.
Yep.
They're nice. My concern is kind of similar to the AirPods 3 in that earbuds are usually on sale and these brand new ones just aren't. So you're talking about like $200 for the Beats Fit Pro and $180 for the new AirPods, whereas you can get these Studio Buds for like $130 right now. And to me, I like those Studio Buds a lot, and especially at $130. It's tough to recommend almost anything else under that sort of $150 price category right now.
Do the Beats Studio Buds have noise canceling?
They do.
Right?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
So they lack wireless charging, but surprise, surprise, the $200 Beats Fit Pros also lack wireless charging. Also, I feel like the Beats Fit Pros, they sound fairly similar. Like there's certainly some differences, and I think it's a lot down to like the chip and the processing because they look very similar like physically, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're like kind of somewhat similar on the inside. They both sound very nice, but I don't know. Like to me, I think the Studio Buds are low-key some of the best headphones you can buy right now because like AirPods Pro sure are better in some ways, but they're, 80, 70, $80 more expensive at the moment. And I kind of like the sound of the Studio Buds more than the AirPods Pro.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that before. I guess really like it's just if you want this form factor.
Yes.
Because it does feel like it is much more of a sporty, right? Like intense fit form factor where like the Beats Studio Buds, AirPods Pro, depending on the activity you're doing, can fall out of your ears, where the Fit Pro is expected not to do that. So if you want it immediately, you'll be paying a premium. But I think what we've learned from what you mentioned, if you wait a little bit longer, these will come down in price. Like you can get AirPods Pro way cheaper now than you can get them from Apple and like through official channels like Amazon and stuff. So
yeah. And I think that's one of the problems with a lot of the AirPod reviews that went up of people like, oh, these are great, but you could buy AirPods Pro for like $10 more, $20 more. So why would you buy the regular AirPods 3?
Some people don't like the silicone things, but to be honest, people that I know that don't like the silicone in-ear thing it seems to be like most of my friends who have got this or have people in their lives that have gotten their AirPods 3 to try out also don't find them as comfortable as regular AirPods.
They're a little bit more divisive, I think.
Yeah.
To me, they are a little bit more comfortable. I like the AirPods 3 more than the older AirPods. But I used to be one of those people. I used to not like silicone ear tips. But I feel like over the last few years, I've just kind of just gotten used to them, and now I don't really think about it all that often. But
right,
it's a tough thing, man. Earbuds are a very personal thing, and I think there's so much sort of activity in sort of the space with, there's so much profit in these little Bluetooth accessories, and everyone wants to make something. And, the quality of these things has massively improved. I mean, it's easy to forget. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that AirPods really kind of changed the game on what fully wireless earbuds could do. Now everyone has a pair. Almost everyone's pairs are good. And there's still good differentiation between, like the Sony side where they have a little bit more of the high end where they've got crazy noise cancellation and better isolation, but also they're big, they're heavy, they're not as sort of cheap. There's a lot of different options.
Yep.
I still think, though, that for most people, the Beats Studio Buds at $130 with active noise cancellation, no matter if you're on the iOS or the Android side of the camp, are still really, really solid.
This episode of The Test Drivers is brought to you by The Intrazone. If you're looking for a new podcast to add to your queue, The Intrazone is a bi-weekly show with conversations and interviews hosted by the SharePoint team on how SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Viva, and more can work for you and your business. I love finding new podcasts to listen to. I especially like shows like this where they focus on specific topics, so you can pick and choose even old episodes when you come across the show for the first time to, maybe get a bit more information in a certain area. Every single episode covers a bunch of segments like news and announcements, focus topics, guest perspectives from product experts inside and outside of Microsoft, as well as focusing on upcoming events, conferences, and workshops. With the Intrazone, you'll be hearing from guest experts behind the scenes and out in the field so you can see how SharePoint and Microsoft 365 fit into your everyday work life and learn more about the flexibility when working with content, workflow, search, and more. I checked out an episode myself where it was really fascinating on looking how you can take paper and, information that's otherwise stored on paper and digitize it and then use all of these tools to make trends and find patterns in this information in a digital form that you otherwise never could if it's all just sitting in like folders and filing cabinets. Every single episode has all these really interesting perspectives, stuff like if you want to learn more about knowledge management and search, or how to change experiences for your employees, or really utilize tools like Microsoft Lists. So go and check it out right now. Search for the Intrazone wherever you get your podcasts. That's INTRAZONE, or you can just click the link in the show notes. Go and check it out. And thanks to the Intrazone by Microsoft SharePoint for their support of this show and Relay FM. So Intel has some new CPUs. People are saying Intel is back. Is Intel back, Austin?
Okay, so something to always consider whenever you have a conversation like this is you have to consider the huge timescales that are involved in making CPUs and process nodes and all this kind of stuff, right? What we're seeing with the 12th gen Intel CPUs was probably already baked in the oven 3, 4, maybe even 5 years ago, right? Like they have already made a lot of these decisions. They were already on this sort of train a long time ago. So it's easy to think like, they saw Ryzen 5 and decided to counter. No, they probably started working on this when Ryzen 1 came out, right? So I think it's just worth kind of thinking about there's these huge bets and there's a lot that's involved here. So the gist of it is this. With 12th gen Intel, there's a few major new bits of tech. First of all is the quote-unquote Intel 7 process, which is their 10, but whatever. The process nodes and the names are whatever. It is a newer process. Thankfully, we're now getting desktop CPUs on a much more modern process node instead of what we've been on forever. We also have the addition of a bunch of new stuff, including DDR5 memory. We have PCI 5.0. And we have they don't call it like this, but it's essentially a big little core design. So you have the P cores and the E cores, just like you've got on that new MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro and the Max and your phone and everything. It seems pretty clear that now really AMD are the main outliers for just having a single set of cores. There's just Zen. There's not high performance, low performance.
Do you think that AMD will change? Will adopt this kind of system too?
It's interesting because maybe the problem is they've said in the past that they were not planning on it, but obviously they're not really going to say much. It's a lot of work. So for context, if you're Apple, right, you've got a lot of incentive to develop two classes of cores, the performance cores and the efficiency cores, the P and the E. The efficiency cores are incredibly helpful on your phones, and they're sort of spread everywhere, but also the watch is using a variant of the E core, right? Like you've got a lot of reason, but to develop an E core and a P core is about the same amount of work. It's a lot of work. And the actual configuration of it, like once you have your CPU core, you put 1, 2, 4, 8, 12, 16, whatever you want to do, you can kind of design the chip around it. But actually developing the cores themselves is very expensive and very time consuming. Intel has gone through that. Now, this is not something brand new for Intel. They've previously they had their regular core processors, and they had like Intel Atom and stuff, which were the smaller things for cheaper devices. So they already had kind of worked on multiple cores at the same time. This is just the first time that we're seeing it in a mainstream chip altogether, right? So you have multiple, depending on Core i5 and i7 and i9, all that kind of stuff. You have multiple performance cores paired with multiple efficiency cores, which can all work together, especially once you have like Windows 11. It's better like scheduling threads and everything like that. AMD does not have an equivalent little core. The last time they had that was, I think it was Jaguar, which was the very sort of weak CPU cores they shipped inside like the Xbox One and the PS4 and whatnot. It's been a long time since they've had that. So right now, the top line is this. Intel has taken back the performance crown, small asterisk. They have a lot of performance, right? Especially when you look at the top end Core i9, you outfit it with DDR5 memory, which does seemingly give you a pretty decent performance advantage. You got a lot of performance, not only in gaming, but also in heavily threaded workloads like, 3D rendering and video editing and that kind of stuff, right? The big asterisk, or the small asterisk, is you need more support for these things, right? So not only are the motherboards more expensive, the memory is very expensive. Some boards will support DDR4, which is probably a smart move at the moment. But also, these things are very power hungry. Intel has kind of opened up the taps like they have for the last couple of years and delivering a lot of performance if you're okay with a lot of power consumption, right? So you're talking about, it'll outperform AMD, but also it'll do it at up to twice the power, which if you've got a big beefy cooler in your gaming PC, cool, sweet, whatever. Right. But not everyone has that. And especially when you think about this being constrained down to like laptops and whatnot, it might be a little bit more of I feel like we're seeing sort of the best case scenario at the moment with
like
the way they
power means, well, I mean, one, you've got to have, as you say, you've got to have the power. So you need to have a power supply that can feed it.
Mm-hmm.
Then power also means heat. So then you need a cooling system that can cool it.
Yes.
So, like as we're recording this, we're just seeing like first benchmarks and stuff like that. And so like in the right conditions with the right, you've got the good motherboard for it. You've got DDR5 RAM for it, which is all new as well. And you have a good cooling system. And you if in the right circumstances, it's beating AMD. But I think over the next, I don't know, days, weeks, we might start to see more about like realistic performance could be different. I don't know. I mean, you can tell me, but like it seems like to get the best out of these systems kind of reminds me of when we got all the new graphics cards. You kind of have to change everything to get the best out of it.
So I think one of the most telling things was Dave 2D did a video on the new processors and stuff, and he built a system. He properly cooled it. It was a smaller system, but he properly cooled it. But he also tested an Alienware with, I believe it was a 120 mil AIO. And he was seeing throttling on a 120 mil AIO, which, to be fair, that is not the beefiest cooler in the world. But also, I would say, I mean, not only would that be plenty for pretty much any sort of regular Ryzen processor, but that's very much probably at least as good, if not slightly better, than most people are using. So if you're building one of these systems or you're buying one, you really need to consider that you need, for maximum performance, a very beefy, you need like a 240 millimeter AIO or 360, or maybe you even need like some giant like air cooler or something. Like you can run these things, and obviously, that's looking at the top end model. And if you're running like maybe an i5 or something, it's going to be a little bit more reasonable. But I think that is something to consider. I don't want to take away, like, I feel like there's been a lot of like negativity around Intel. They deserve props for delivering a very meaningful jump in performance, right? Not only are they ahead, their first to ship DDR5 and PCI 5.0, which really there's not much you can do with PCI 5.0 right now, but you can imagine, be able to hook up crazy SSDs and graphics cards and all that kind of stuff over the coming years. The thing is, right now, though, these chips are also pretty expensive. Now, it does depend. We'll see how the actual supplies are. That's probably going to get sold out immediately like everything else. But technically, these are usually, based on the SKU, a little bit more expensive than AMD. And to be fair, they generally deliver also a little bit more performance. So that's not by coincidence. But it's an interesting spot. And also, it's an interesting spot because you're comparing these new Intel chips to essentially year-old AMD stuff. And we know that they have not only another revision of Ryzen 5000 with the better cache and whatnot, but also they have a brand new full generation, which is going to be coming out likely somewhere in like the middle of next year. So there's a lot to kind of break down here. I think it's a good thing. I think it's very exciting that Intel has finally gotten rid of the last vestiges of that old stuff, the 14 nanometer processors that they kept dragging along. But it does seem like to hit the kind of performance that they have done, they had to be pretty high on that sort of power to performance curve. They had to really kind of throw a lot of voltage, a lot of watts of power at these chips to get this kind of performance. Whereas AMD, with what is still a superior process, were able to do it in a much more efficient way, even though technically they don't have the additional like P and E cores and all this kind of stuff. It's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one. But I think it's a very, very good thing for all of us gamers who want to rise up and get the most power.
Oh, boy.
There's some good... No, but it's for real, though. There's some good...
No, I want to see this. I don't want... Personally, I don't want to just see like AMD like continually take a lead. Like I want to see Intel catch up, AMD try and beat Intel, and similarly, we're going to talk about this in a bit, Apple in the fray of it all, which is hilarious now. Like you just think like historically, it's just like a hilarious thought. But like I want to see all of these companies pushing each other. Like for all we know, I don't know, but like what is clearly ARM and Apple kind of going down this like split core model has pushed Intel into this. Especially because Intel had to do something. Because they're still on their 10 nanometer process.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious to me that they've called this their, what is it, Intel 7?
7.
But it's still, it's like this is like smoke and mirrors. It's called 7. It's like this is Intel's 7 process, but it's still on 10 nanometer. They're not on the 7 nanometer yet, which they still haven't been able to hit. But I mean, this is great though, because on their 10 nanometer, they're still able to outperform AMD at the moment. Or like AMD's stuff from last year, but that's still good, right?
Yes.
So like when Intel eventually get to their incredibly delayed 7 nanometer, it should push them further again. So this is good that they're able to find these gains on this process, but it's still hilarious to me that they're calling it Intel 7.
Yeah, I mean, like I will give them a little bit of credit. The idea of like a 5 nanometer, 4 or 7 or 10 nanometer processor, it all is pretty fuzzy because like you're not really measuring.
It doesn't mean you're going to get more performance. It doesn't mean that. You still have to optimize for that. You still have to get it out, right?
Well, also it's almost more of a marketing thing, right? Because like I think the better way to think about it, oftentimes, it's complicated, but one of the better ways to think about it is just how dense the processes are. And so if you think about traditionally, shrinking from, 10 to 7 to 5 or whatever would mean that you can make a more dense chip. And what we've seen is that the Intel 10 is good, but maybe not quite as dense as like TSMC 7, and certainly not as dense as TSMC 5, which is what not only all of the Apple chips have been on for a little while now, like M1, M1 Max, and Pro, and A15 and whatnot, but also now they're working toward like 4 and 3 and whatnot. So it's complicated, but I agree. I think it's absolutely a good thing that there's some real competition here. Intel is not like that like weird kind of almost the old school AMD option of, remember like when like AMD chips were not that great, but they would like throw 1 billion watts at them and be like, we can overclock to 75 gigahertz. And everyone's like, well, I guess this kind of makes sense sometimes. Like there's real reasons to go with Intel and with AMD right now. My big concern really, at least in this sort of early phase, is that to get this really nice CPU performance out of Intel chips, you need to pay a lot of money for a motherboard. and you also have to pay a lot of money for DDR5 memory. You can skimp on both, but then you're kind of sort of sacrificing the future because like if you get a DDR5 motherboard, you always have to be DDR5. Same thing with DDR4. And my assumption is most people will want the more future-proof board that you can use for, however many years and generations in the future. So it's not as clear-cut as just looking at a couple of benchmarks, looking at the price of the CPU and calling it a day.
Yeah, I think I still want to see, right? What does it look like if you do? Because you these chips, do they require new motherboards?
Yes, it is an all-new socket.
Okay.
Oh, so also something to consider. It is not only a new socket, but it is a new larger socket, which means that most CPU coolers will not work. You need a specific bracket.
So it needs a new motherboard and needs a new cooler, but you can use DDR4 RAM if you want to.
Yes, but
right?
So any of these 12th gen chips will work with DDR4 or DDR5. However, a motherboard will only do one or the other. So you can't swap in DDR4 or DDR5. If you pick a board, it either works with DDR4 or DDR5, but there's no cross compatibility. The same chip will work, but you have to pick. And my assumption looked at based on kind of what they've announced so far, DDR5 is a little bit more prevalent in the high end, and a lot of the lower end boards are DDR4, which has knock-on effects of, you need a lot of cooling and a lot of VRM to feed the 200 plus watts to the chip. It's complicated. It's definitely complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially complicated considering, I guess, a lot of people will have upgraded some components in the machine to get a new graphics card.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's like, oh, you want to get the best? Well, you got to get rid of 75% of your PC again.
That's exactly it. So it's a good thing that there is this competition. I do think that this is a major step forward, but I think it is not as cut and dry as just, sweet, look how fast this thing is, look how great it is. Because it's easy to watch a 2-minute video, see some benchmarks. Obviously Intel's way ahead. And if you have the money and if you have the right setup, they are. But there are enough variables and enough extra money you need to spend to get there. Whereas on the AMD side, it's a little bit more straightforward. Although, to give some credit here, it does seem like there's some potential big looming changes on the AMD side as well. So the next generation likely will be DDR5. In fact, they may have already confirmed that. Very likely will also have a new CPU socket. I believe they've talked about that. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that that's what they're doing. So some of this stuff that we're talking about with more expensive boards and everything on the Intel side, probably going to be the same for AMD here in the next year. So,
well, I mean, I can speak to difficulties with motherboards and AMD processors, right? Like you've had this a bunch of times. It's like, yeah, it works, but you need to have an old processor lying around. It's like, oh, great. Like,
Yeah. So it's good though. I'm just happy because I feel like we've been talking so much about how as soon as M1 came out, it sort of changed the conversation and it's just like, oh my God, Apple just destroying everyone and Intel is terrible and they're dropping out of MacBooks and stuff. But now it's like, look, there are very good reasons, performance-wise, price-wise and whatnot, that you can see, oh, look, these M1 Max and M1 Pros and stuff are great. But also, this Ryzen processor is super killer for this laptop. And this new Intel processor is great for my really high-end gaming workstation. It's nice that there is legitimate, good options across the board instead of oh, well, I've got to use X because that's my only option.
Yeah. So the MacBook Pros, we both have MacBook Pros. You don't have, quote, your MacBook Pro yet, though, right?
Yes. So we were a little late on ordering. I think I talked about this last time. We needed a fair few upgrades in the office. So I'm currently waiting on my 14-inch M1 Max, which is going to arrive at some point in the next...
What were your specs?
So I've got 32 gigs of RAM, the M1 Max with the 32-core GPU, and a 2 terabyte SSD in silver.
Have you not? Because I know stores are carrying some of the higher.
I've looked through. I could probably cancel my order and try to track something down, but as we'll probably talk about briefly, after spending some time with a base model 14, so we have one of these in the office. They're just a base 14-inch. I'm not in any huge rush to drop my 13-inch M1 MacBook.
What?
Nope.
What? Look at you, Mr. Contrarian.
I am. Look, I'm a Z Flip user. I'm talking about my old MacBook that's 12 months old at this point. We can talk about it. I don't know if you have thoughts because you already have your quote unquote final model, right?
I have mine, like it's my 14-inch. I went with the max, but the middle GPU, like the 24 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And 2 terabytes of SSD storage, 64 gigabytes of RAM.
Nice.
And I absolutely adore it. It's incredible. I love this computer so much.
So I'm really curious because you still record a mix of, you use an iMac, an M1 iMac to record.
That's what I'm using right now.
So then, okay, where does the MacBook fit in your life?
So my MacBook Pro is like everything I do on a computer that is not recording and editing a podcast, which for me is a lot, is most of my computer time, right?
Yeah.
Like all of my show prep, all of my like email communication, all that kind of stuff, like my general work is all being done on a MacBook Pro. Now, the vast majority of time, it's plugged into an LG display, right? Which is a bit of an upset for me now because the display on the laptop is so much better. Like this wasn't so much of an issue with my previous MacBook Pro, where like I knew the display on the MacBook Pro was better, but like, well, not in ways that was, I was upset about. But this is like, it's missing out on the 120 frames per second. The color, obviously the mini LED color, like the Pro Display, what do they call it? The
XDR.
Liquid Retina XDR, I think they call it that. That's the name of that one, I think. But the XDR-ness of it, like I'm missing out all of that, which is like a real shame. It's like everybody using one of these things, I'm dying for Apple to bring out an external display of their own now. Because plus, just my experience of docking is just not that great.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have a bunch of issues with like I have to every day I have to unplug and replug the cable in the back of the monitor for the dock for it to work. I don't know why. I feel like at some point I need to maybe just try again with this thing, but I have a CalDigit dock, right? And that dock is got like I've got like a bunch of things plugged into it, like a keyboard and the mouse dongle and all that kind of stuff. And then I have a cable coming from the dock to the monitor, which is, but the monitor is a USB-C monitor, right? We spoke about this before. So a USB kit. And then I have the Thunderbolt cable going into the laptop, right? So I plug the cable into the laptop. Everything starts working except the monitor doesn't work. So I have to unplug the monitor, replug the monitor, and then everything's fine. Every day I have to do this.
Okay, yeah.
Because docking is just not great. So, but I know that if Apple did it, it would work. No problem.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, so it's just a frustration. I don't know why I have this issue with the laptop, but I do. Like, like my M1 iMac, I have a second display. I have a Dell display on the side of it. And that one never has issues. So I don't know what it is specifically about my arrangement, but there's something wrong with my particular arrangement that everything works except the monitor doesn't come on until I unplug and replug the monitor. I don't know why this is. But then once I've done it that one time, it's fine.
Yeah.
Right? So like if my monitor goes to sleep, I just press a key and it all wakes up again. It's just that initial plugging in. There's something about the like, like it can get the stuff with docks and like Thunderbolt or whatever, like where there is an argument about which is the dominant just like thing that's plugged in. Right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's the thing that can happen with a lot of this stuff. And I feel like there's some exchange that's not happening. Anyway, this is pointless for this discussion. But that's what I'm using my MacBook Pro for most of the time.
Okay.
But what I have right now is just this incredibly powerful machine.
Yeah. So, okay, there's a bunch of stuff to talk about with these things, right? So I feel like most everyone's already kind of talked about the basics. Like everyone's seen, like there's a notch, right? And like, I know how you feel. Care. Yeah, it's whatever. It doesn't matter. I think they could use a little bit of software tweaking with some of the menu bar items. Because like on my 13, I'm looking at my menu bar right now, and I definitely have items all the way across, which I know we talked about last time with Bartender.
Yeah,
we can
you need to use Bartender. I mean, I've been using Bartender anyway, so my menu bar is pretty tidy. Like my menu bar at its like maximum of everything I put in it doesn't come close to the notch. So
yeah. So like, fine. I am pleasantly surprised with the size and the weight, right? So I know that 14 is definitely kind of the sweet spot. The 16 is huge. Like that thing is legitimately great if you need that kind of screen real estate. And I know a lot of people do. I used to use the 16, but I've seen the light, and the light is not as heavy and not as big and is much easier to put on.
14 is you're closer to 16. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's you've got more screen, right? So you're getting closer.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, it looks bigger and heavier. It looks. It isn't really. I mean, it is. I mean, look, if you look at the specs, it is bigger and heavier. But in usage, I don't feel that. But like when you look at it, it looks like a thing, you know?
Yeah. The speakers are actually, obviously the screen is great, right? Like I think that was kind of what I expected. I didn't expect the speakers to be so good, and the speakers have already been really good on like the 13-inch MacBook that I'm coming on from. But the 14, I know they talk about like the spatial audio and this and that, but I mean it's got some real stereo sort of separation. There's some real sort of like low end response, and it feels very full. Like they've done a really good job of tuning it and tweaking it, especially considering that I feel like some I don't know how many speakers are in the 14, but at least one of their two of them are downward firing, and then the rest are sort of upward firing, but kind of like at different angles. So it does a good job. I'm curious, like you always use headphones though. Do you actually use the speakers on your MacBook very often?
I mean, yes, but it's usually closed, but it still works fine. So like I'll watch like a video or whatever, right? And the sound's coming out of the closed laptop, but it does a good job. You know, like I'm just eating lunch or whatever and watching my favorite Austin Evans content or whatever, you know? And so, but it does a fine job for that, right? Like I don't need pristine audio in those environments. Like, and most of the time I use my AirPods, but I listen to audio from it, but I have obviously tried it out with the laptop open and stuff. And it's great, you know, it does a great job.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions for you.
But when I edit podcasts, though, I do edit with headphones on.
Right. Which I mean makes sense. Like I always wear headphones when we're recording and whatnot.
Surprised. It's always surprised me. A lot of my friends and like people that I know, they edit through speakers. I don't get it, but that's what they do.
I kind of get that from some ways because, like, you know, if you think about if you're really deep in like the audio production side of things, most people who are like listening, like creating like music and stuff, they do it on speakers. They don't really do it on headphones. So I guess there is a little bit of that's the way it typically is done. But I agree. Like I always use headphones if I'm recording, if I'm doing anything to do with audio, if I'm editing video, whatever the case is. I just always like a pair of headphones. So okay, I have some questions for you. How is battery life on your 14-inch? Like how, I know you say you have it docked a lot, but
yeah,
that's one of my big question marks waiting for my unit is like, is it going to be that great?
Here's what I'll say. So I've spent some time, like when I was setting it up and using it over the first few days, obviously using it a lot, right?
Yeah.
At home, just using it as a laptop. And I've been doing a little bit more of that recently because I really like using this computer. It's like, you know, like I would go and grab it at a time when I might use an iPad when I'm at home, but I'll go grab the laptop. And I will say battery life is really good. It doesn't feel as good as my 13-inch, but still more than enough.
Okay. That's good to know.
Right? Like it is still at the level where this is the most battery power I'll get from any device I own.
Okay.
You know, like it's better than my iPad. But I can tell it's draining a bit quicker than the 13.
Yeah.
But not but that is as expected from the specs and stuff. Of like this is still all day battery, but it gets a couple of hours less than the 13-inch.
Yeah. And to be fair, that's exactly what I had hoped for, because when you think about the 13, it is so ridiculous. Like, I mean, the fact of like, I charge this laptop just randomly when I'm like, oh, I should probably plug in at some point. Like, I never really think about it. Is such a big deal. And you look at the new display, which I assume is probably going to be more power hungry. I don't know that, but I just...
Well, no, because it's variable refresh still. So it's I think it balances itself out in that way.
Fair. Yeah.
You know, like similar to how the iPad does it and how the iPhone does it. Yeah. It's benefiting that way.
Well, then I would also be curious as far as the chip, because then actually you on an episode of Connected recently got to actually chat with some people on the sort of the chip side.
It was an upgrade on Upgrade. Yeah, we got to on Upgrade. We got to talk to Tim Millay and Tom Boga from Apple, and Tim is one of the vice presidents in the architecture, like the chip architecture, and so he it was a really good conversation. I recommend people go check it out because we got to ask like a lot about like what were the decisions that you were making when looking at how you put these chips together. And also it was really fascinating to kind of talk about how they kind of see themselves or not when looking at the overall competition now, because, we're just talking about this. Intel, AMD, and now Apple are all in like a similar power and like results area now, which is really weird and interesting. And so, yeah, it was kind of fascinating to kind of see what they think they are and where they think they are compared to the competition.
And it's really interesting because, like, obviously these chips are a huge step forward, and especially if the rumors are true and that sort of the future of the Mac Pro and the iMac Pro, whatever, is sort of taking a bunch of these chips and continuing to glue them together and making a Lego masterpiece of this huge thing. I think they've got a really good place to start. Now, it does make sense as far as on the laptop side that battery life would be impacted, because if you think about it, it's not only a physically larger chip, but on the Pro, you've got double the memory that you need to feed. And on the Mac, you've got quadruple the memory compared to the M1. So like those chips, even if it's not a lot, having the fact that they are connected and always taking some power is going to have a battery sort of life penalty, especially considering that the underlying technology between them is all the same anyway. Can we talk about the touch bar for a second? Can we just do that? Can we just take a little detour?
Why would you want to talk about the touch bar? Who cares?
Okay, I'm going to say this in the most diplomatic way I possibly can.
Okay.
It's a safe space here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think Apple made a mistake, and I want my touch bar back.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yep. So look, okay. I have always liked the touch bar. The touch bar is not a perfect thing by any means. It always has been, to me, oversold as like, look at the potential, look at all the possibilities you can do. Well, guess what? We're like 5 years into the touch bar. It still does almost exactly the same thing it did from day one, right? But you know what it does from day one that nothing else does? It works better than stupid buttons that don't do anything, Mike. Ugh.
So what have you lost?
Okay.
What is?
Okay. So for a small example, right? As we record, you know what I've got on my touch bar right now? I've got a little record light. I have this length of our recording. I have a little start-stop button. You know what I don't have to do? I don't have to go tab through my windows. I don't have to go pull up a keyboard shortcut. I can just literally look at my touch bar, right?
So here's what I've thought this when I saw the new MacBook Pros, and I looked at the height of the function row, and I thought, I think in another world I would have liked half height function keys and a touch bar.
Yes. Look,
the problem with the touch bar for me was they just never really did anything with it. But I enjoyed using it. Like it was a nicer way to change the volume, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so much faster to just put my finger down, slide it left and right, not tap. I'm so ingrained in just tapping and sliding my volume or anything like that. Also, in Final Cut, I use it all the time, right? Like I have a bunch of my keyboard shortcuts up on top where I don't have to think about it. Yes, can I remap that to something else? Sure. But I didn't need to, because that useless row of function keys that I never did anything with had a bunch of the stuff that I used on a regular basis, right? Like, I get it. I also get the fact that not only was the touch bar not popular, and to be fair, a lot of people complain about the touch bar freezing and breaking on them, which in all the years I've had a touch bar, I've never had any problems with. So I guess I can't speak to that. I guess some people have just bad luck with it or something, but it's always been fine for me. But also I think about it from a cost perspective. This is a really weird custom OLED that they've been shipping, right? Like no one else, like they're definitely custom ordering this very specific size and shape. It's not probably massively expensive, but you know what it is? Definitely more expensive than a couple of freaking function keys that they drop into the keyboard, right? So it's like, if they had to save the $20, whatever that costs to, make the touch bar, and they put that into the better display, sure. If everyone hated the touch bar and is happy it's gone, sure. To me, though, it's just like, I'm fine with it. Like, I'm going to use the new MacBook. I'll forget all about this wonderful period of my life where I got to have a relationship with the touch bar. But like, it irritates me that everyone's like celebrating what I consider to be a downgrade, and it doesn't set right with me, and I just need to talk about it. because I've been holding this inside for a while and it's just not healthy. I want I'm not in any rush at all to drop my M1 MacBook because I'm going to be staring at my touch bar and be like, goodbye, little buddy. We had some good times together.
Interesting. That's interesting. I don't know anybody that feels strongly about it. Like I did, of all of my friends, I felt like I was the only one who liked it, but I also found it frustrating too because like I noticed that was kind of like where I rested my hands on the keyboard, I would find myself hitting the buttons unnecessarily. But I always felt like there was opportunity that was missed with the touch bar. I would like to see them try and do something again in the future, but not at the expense of removing the buttons as well. Because there were certain things where like wasn't as simple, like getting to mute, like was not as simple, like you're just hitting a mute button. So I don't know. I would like to see them do more. I would like to see them maybe look at some way they could incorporate it. I mean, frankly, I just want a touchscreen on a Mac. Like, just want them to do that. Like, that's the route to go. I don't know why they won't do it. And I feel like anybody that says, I don't understand why you'd want that, has not used a Windows laptop with a touchscreen.
Look, I go back and forth between a lot of devices, like I'm sure you do on a very regular basis, right? And for a while, I would actually touch my non-touchscreen laptop screen or whatever. I was like, oh, ha, ha, ha. I used an iPad yesterday. I guess it's like, no, you know what? I still do that. I still do it all the time because everything else in my life is a touchscreen. And I just like, I just swiped to my MacBook screen now. Just got it dirty.
I don't want to like start typing on an on-screen keyboard on my Mac, right?
No.
Like that's stupid. But I want to be able to reach up to the menu bar and hit the volume button, like or scroll a page or whatever. Like some things, it's nice to just have the options. It's like if you've ever used an iPad with a Magic Keyboard, you understand that Apple agrees with this idea, right? That you can have keyboard and a trackpad and a touchscreen. Like,
absolutely.
For iPad OS, it works. For Mac OS, for some reason, they think it doesn't work, and I don't agree with them.
Yeah. So, look, I'm happy, and I'm going to be very happy when I get to do my first edit on an M1 Max and watch it export.
I can't wait to see how, like, when you start actually putting it through its paces to that level. I mean, what I'll say is, against an M1 iMac, which is very similar in performance to my iMac Pro with audio stuff, I'm seeing a pretty consistent, like, 20% speed increase.
Okay.
Which, I mean, I think is quite a bit. Like it's quite, I mean, and this is under like they're not optimizing for audio stuff the way that they optimize for video stuff.
Yeah.
So this is just like a 20% raw power increase that I'm seeing, right?
Like I doubt Logic is leaning heavily on your giant max GPU that's really flexing its muscles.
Exactly. And this is why I didn't go for the full fat GPU option, because I just knew that like it's not going to really benefit me as much. And it's like, look, they have video encoders built into the system on a chip, and they just don't do this stuff for audio. But it's like audio doesn't need it, right? Because an audio export takes a couple of minutes, right? And it's just like, and that's at like full quality, right? Like I'm exporting like a uncompressed WAV file, and it takes a couple of minutes. So like it's it's just like it's not as intensive an operation. But I'm seeing like a 20% increase on that, which is just like fantastic, right? Like why not more speed? Why not?
Why not? Yeah, and I think especially in the audio editing world, I feel like a lot of the people who really try to flex these things are like music producers who are going to run 400 plugins at the same time.
Yeah,
and all they want
be way harder. Yeah,
they want a pile of RAM and a bunch of CPU cores. That's what they need for that,
and it will get the job done.
So look, I'm excited. I'm happy that there's a 14-inch that I'm not having to compromise in performance. Like that was the main reason why I used to use 15s and 16s, because there was such a huge performance delta between the 13-inch and the 15 or the 16. I'm happy that I'm sure when I really dig into it and benchmark, the 14 is probably going to lose a little bit of performance and like rendering because it doesn't have the same kind of thermal capability. Whatever. It's fine. Like I've been happy with the M1. If I was on this M1 for another year, it would be fine. But shiny new toys.
This episode is brought to you by Pingdom from SolarWinds. While you've been listening to this show, how would you know if your website had gone down? Would you know if your customers couldn't click that buy button or fill out a triumph form? You might stumble across it by luck, but that means you've already lost out on new customers. You need something to tell you that everything's running smoothly on your website, and more importantly, when it isn't, so you need Pingdom. Pingdom detects around 13 million outages every month. That's more than 400,000 outages a day. And for as low as $10 a month, Pingdom helps keep your sites online. It doesn't matter if you're a startup or a Fortune 500 company, you need real-time alerts about critical website issues and customization of how you're alerted, whether it's via SMS, email, or your team's collaboration apps. Pingdom even tracks and analyzes your website's load times, so you know that when something's affecting your experiences and when it isn't. And so you can really make those informed choices. If you have a website, you need Pingdom. Take charge of monitoring your site in minutes and go to pingdom.com/relayfm and you'll get a 30-day free trial with no credit card required. Then when you sign up, use the code TESTDRIVERS at checkout and you'll get a huge 30% off your first invoice. That's pingdom.com/relayfm right now for a 30-day free trial with no credit card required. And when you sign up, use the code TESTDRIVERS at checkout and you'll get 30% off your first invoice. Our thanks to Pingdom from SolarWinds for their support of this show and Relay FM. Pixel 6 and Pixel 6 Pro.
Woo-hoo.
Now, I do not own one of these devices. I haven't. Like every cool device, I thought about it, and it's no, I'm fine.
You
I'm
hovered
fine.
over the buy button, you're like,
I have my Z Flip with my amazing Z Flip case, and that will do it for me. But I was just poking around. I've watched a bunch of reviews, and I would say this device, I haven't seen something like this in a long time. I feel like every review that I've watched, and I maybe watched 5 at this point, every single one of them has disagreed on basically every single point. And I couldn't believe it. I'd watch Dave 2D's video,
yep,
or I'd watch MKBHD's video, or I'd watch The Verge's video, and everyone had a completely different set of opinions about the Pixel 6. And you don't see this. I just feel like this is not a thing that you see. Like the iPhone, everyone's views are basically the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Samsung Galaxy S20, everyone's views basically the same, right? Like it's better in this, it's better in this, it's worse in this. Like you watch one or two of them and you can guess how it's going to go. And this is not a criticism of the creators. It's just there just isn't that much to disagree about, right? They know what they're doing and they've improved on it in this way, and maybe it's worse in such and such a way, but you can kind of just you know what it's going to be. But for whatever reason, this phone seems to be it has more opinion to it than any other phone that I've seen in a long time.
It's a much more divisive and subjective kind of opinion on the Pixel, right? So, there's a lot to dig into. Okay, I guess let's talk about camera, because I think camera is definitely where the subjectivity comes in. Look, I have taken some absolutely incredible photos on the Pixel 6. I've also taken some photos that were embarrassed in comparison to the iPhone. They just were bad, right? And it's inconsistency is one thing, but it very much depends on where you're at and what you're doing. My sort of general thought is this. The Pixel takes great photos most of the time, but it does, to my eye, tend to lean a little bit too much on the processing, which obviously has always been a Pixel thing. But this generation, actually Ken and I were sitting back and he was looking at some photos from the Pixel 2 that he had taken back in Japan a few years ago. And it was just looking at some of those images, you could tell they were obviously doing a lot of computational photography, but it seemed like it was a little bit more of a lighter touch. And obviously, it's so subjective, right? On what you think looks good versus not. But to me, it almost feels like Google has taken the AI processing slider and they've bumped it to 11 and they should bring it to 8.5, 9, which is probably where the iPhone, for example, kind of lives. Like, it just, sometimes these images just look way too HDRified. You know, you look at like skin, like it completely treats skin a different way than like the fabric of your shirt. And you look at it and go like, that's just not what a photo should look like. I get the idea of like, you know, situating certain parts of an image and sort of toning down others. But you look at that and you look at like a sky, which is like 100% exposure and shadows that have been lifted. It's just like, it's like you've thrown a crazy amount of filtering at every single photo. And sometimes it just works. But a lot of times it's just like, it's a little like much.
You shared some images with me that were weird.
Yeah. So I would say most images I've taken on the Pixel are good. Some are terrific. But they're like, I would say maybe 10% of the shots I take on the Pixel are okay or kind of bad. And that's just not something like, if it's the Z Flip, right? Like that's about the same hit rate as the Z Flip, right? When I'm taking a photo on the Z Flip, most of the time the images are good. Rarely are they amazing, but most times they're pretty good. And then sometimes I'm like, it's pretty grainy, or the color is off, or whatever the case is. You know what I never have a problem with is the iPhone. The iPhone always takes a good image. It is so rare to take something, and when it is, it's usually like when I'm using the telephoto and like low light. Like that's usually the spot where I'm like, it missed a little bit. But like when I'm taking a normal still on the main sensor on the iPhone 13 Pro, it is always good, if not great. And it's like, to me, like some of those pixel images that I shared with you, like some of those I could probably spend 5-10 minutes and I could fix them. But you know, I don't want to have to do that, because I would rather just the image to look great. Like I take a lot of photos. I happen to have a little one who I take lots and lots of photos of. I don't have to go through and spend 5 to 10 minutes for every photo I take every day, trying to filter it and, you know, tweak my white balance and bring my exposure down and all this kind of nonsense, right? It's like, to me, I just think that the Pixel kind of has always been predicated on, the success of it really has been around the idea that it has this amazing, incredible camera. And it does have a very good camera, right? Like we're comparing it to the iPhone, which is incredible. If you compare it to most everything else, it is really good. And again, when it hits, it absolutely hits. Like some of those images are incredible. But I think, especially when you look at the Pixel 6 Pro at $900, it is a very good camera, and it sort of fits in among some of the best, but it is not the best, and it kind of needs to be, in my opinion. Also feels like they could fix it. I feel like some of it is just like, guys, just take the camera out, just dial it down a little bit, and we'll be in much better shape. Like maybe it's more of a subjective taste thing, but that to me is probably the best explanation of why there's so much like sort of differing opinions on the Pixel 6, and why some people love it and why some people are a little bit more jaded by it, because it's just, they're doing a lot of stuff to it. It's a very sort of like art over science kind of thing.
And at the moment, it's like you're gonna kind of have to wait to see if it changes, but it might not, and you might not need it to. I think one of the things I feel like I'm getting from this phone is that it is different in the way that it does seem to be different for different people, like depending on what your personal set of circumstances are.
Mm-hmm.
That makes this phone quite unique, I feel, compared to what's out there. Where, like, depending on who you are and what you want from your phone, this could be the perfect phone for you, maybe in a way that other phones wouldn't be. I don't know.
Absolutely. No, I think the regular Pixel 6 is the move. The 6 Pro, we'll talk about it, but like the 6 Pro is okay at $900. The regular Pixel 6 is $600 is an absolute unquestionable recommendation, right? Like, yeah, when I'm comparing the $1,000 iPhone 13 Pro to the $600 Pixel 6, I still prefer the iPhone camera a little bit, right? But if I consider the price there, it is like it's not even close to how much more that sort of price to performance is in the Pixel's favor, right? And it's not just the camera, right? Yes, the telephoto is missing on the 6, but like, that's fine. The telephoto is nice on the Pro, but it's not worth $300. I like the screen on the regular Pixel 6. I wish it was 120 hertz, but also I don't really care that much. The flat display is nice. What I really want, and surprise, surprise, Mr. Austin Contrarian Evans here, I wish it was smaller, because both of these phones are big. Like the Pro is huge. The regular Pixel 6 to me is still very large, right?
Yeah, they're pretty big. They're
Yeah.
pretty big.
And I will also say, before we completely move away from the camera stuff, the video is fine. It's better than most Android video. It is not as good as what Apple is able to do on the iPhone. Like, especially with the iPhone 13, for a recent video or for a upcoming video, which will be going live in the next week or so, that we'll definitely talk about. I would say a good 30-40% of that video was shot on iPhone. No one's going to notice. I feel very confident that if people notice, it's going to be only because they're looking for it. That footage looks great in the right conditions, which are, to be fair, most of them, right? So there's that. Okay. The price. We got to talk about the price. $600 for the Pixel 6 is so good for what you get. Like, there's certainly some things that the phone is missing. And I think battery life is one that is like, it's pretty decent, but also not really anything that's particularly amazing. But $600, like, there's like, this is almost like the old school Nexus or OnePlus, but it's more of a complete package, I guess would be the way I would describe it, because the Pixel 6 isn't necessarily the greatest at most things, but it is pretty damn good at almost everything. The Tensor chip is perfectly performant, screen is good, the build is decent, the camera is very good. Like, there's a lot going for it. It's just the Pro is where I'm just like, the $300 is such a big difference for what is basically the same thing.
Yeah. What do you think about Material U and all that kind of stuff? How does that impact your experience using this phone?
This is the thing that almost got me in trouble last time. I wanted to talk about this so much. I actually love freaking Material U, man. Like, I love it in a way that's definitely like a little bit like the way I love the Z Flip, which is not 100% rational. I am a dude who oftentimes, like, okay, my MacBook that I'm recording on right now, I never changed the default wallpaper. A lot of times, I don't care. Like, I'm whatever. Material U, I probably have swapped the wallpaper on this Pixel 20 times since I've gotten it, because what it does is it will pull a few colors from your wallpaper and use those as accent colors throughout the OS. Sounds simple, and it is kind of simple, but it's so much fun. Like, I was like tweaking like the green of my wallpaper to like try to match the green of the phone, and it's fresh. It feels good. You know, it's in the keyboard, it's in the Gmail app. It's not everywhere to be fair, but it's in a lot of places when you pull down the notification shade or what have you. I am actually kind of sad that we'll probably not see that ever land on like the Z Flip or most other non-Pixel phones. I don't know how other companies are going to take the, Material U and sort of, I don't know how much of this is baked into Android 12 versus the Pixel. My assumption is most of it is baked into the Pixel. But it's really nice. Like, the software, honestly, might be my favorite thing on the Pixel 6. It's really, really nice.
Because I feel like the widgets, right? So like the widgets that Google have built, they will adapt to Material U.
Yes.
I don't know if other developers are going to do this.
I mean, okay, it's weird because like Android has had widgets forever, and widgets were there, and I've always used a handful of calendar widget or whatever on Android. But I feel like last year iOS got widgets, and suddenly they were the hot, cool new thing. And I feel like Google was like, "Oh right, we have this," and they like sort of refreshed their widgets. But man, I gotta tell you, there are a lot of widgets on Android that feel like they're straight out of like 2012, right? I'm looking at you, Spotify. I'm looking at you, like which I think that this is a fixable thing. If people start caring a little bit more, and sort of Material U is a little bit more of a like, all devices kind of get some elements of that, and there's more reason for developers to pay attention. But to me, I'm just like, the widgets that I do use are nice, but most of them are third-party widgets that are very custom, and I can't see a lot of developers completely rewriting their widgets just to look a little bit prettier. I mean, if they do, great. But Material U is really nice, though. A lot of stuff in Android 12, like, the only thing that really kind of bothers me, it's a really nitpick, is that it now takes an extra couple of swipes to, like, turn on and off Wi-Fi. Because when you swipe down, it doesn't give you a Wi-Fi toggle. It gives you an internet toggle. And then you click on that, and then it opens up, oh, here's your Wi-Fi, and here's your cellular, and then you can adjust them from there. I feel that's a little bit too much swiping and clicking to just turn off Wi-Fi, which is what I do pretty regularly. But that's a really minor thing. Like, the software on these phones is terrific, feels good, looks great. So it's just fun. And I don't say that about a lot of software, that it actually is fun without looking cartoonish and, terrible.
Does the like changing the wallpaper, changing the colors, is that like pretty reliable? Like you feel like it hits right?
Yeah. So it'll instantly do it for you, but you can also tweak it. So like it'll pull the colors that it thinks are like the handful. I think it's like 3 or 4 like primary colors from the wallpaper. But you also can just open those colors up and just tweak it a little bit if you want, right? I was kind of like having fun with just not tweaking it and just like changing different wallpapers and watching it like pull the orange and the yellow and the black and the green or whatever the case is out of those wallpapers. I would say it is very good at figuring out those colors and figuring out what colors work well for your interface, and then figuring out like, oh, here's the light version, here's the medium, here's the accent color or what have you.
Does the Pixel have a way of automatically changing the wallpaper?
Ooh, but
you see what I'm asking? Like,
yeah.
Could, like if I say like, hey, here is an album that I really like, can you just pull new images out of this album?
So in the past, the Pixels have given you an option to automatically like swap your wallpaper in like a category of like landscapes or whatever every day. I'll be honest with you, I have only used a bunch of my cool wallpapers that I like. So I actually haven't tested that. I bet that there is a way for you to automatically have it pull and look kind of different. I will say though, it is a little bit jarring to have lots of different colors. Like I find it to be kind of fun, but also like when you open up Gmail and like the app is like 20% opacity, green or blue or red or orange or whatever, it does look a little bit odd, especially some of the orange and the red wallpapers. It almost looks a little bit like Night Shift is on, which I'm not a huge fan of, which is why I leaned more on the greens and the blues. So I would say it might be a little bit jarring if you're changing your wallpaper every day and the entire interface goes with it. But generally speaking, and obviously it's a subjective thing, generally speaking, I think they do a really good job of making it just kind of look nice. Like it always just looks nice if you like that kind of aesthetic, which I personally do.
So obviously they have a lot of like focus on tensor. Do you feel like there was anything that tensor that you could point to is added to your experience?
So tensor's interesting. I mean, now that we've kind of the embargo's up and everyone's kind of been able to poke around, it's a Samsung chip. Like it's a Samsung semi-custom chip that there's some googly bits inserted. Like performance is solid. There's a couple things on the downside. I'm disappointed with how slow the photo processing is. Like if you just take photos and you don't really think about it, it's fine. It'll do it in the background. But if you take a photo and you want to open it up and see the preview, I've seen it take several seconds to process that preview, which to be fair, like, the iPhone takes a second, my Galaxy takes a second, my Z Flip. But I feel like both of those phones take like maybe 1.5 seconds for things to sharpen up and to process. I feel like with the Pixel, I've sat there waiting 3, 4, 5 seconds for it to finally get rid of the preview and actually show me the full res image, which I think partially is because it is using that 50 megapixel sensor. They've kind of got to like downsample and everything like that. So on one side, it feels slower than like older Pixels, especially when they used to ship with the visual core when it comes to, doing the processing and everything sort of in more real time. On the flip side, though, stuff like the voice typing is really incredible. Like, you look at the demos, and it is just as good as what you see in, like, a Marquez video or something, where it's instant. It does a very good job with adding, like, punctuation and whatnot. I can see a scenario in which if you're taking notes or I feel like you could write a script or something with the voice and just go in and just tweak it from, here or there. But, like, it does a really good job. And that, I would assume, is primarily running on Tensor. But also, I'm not totally convinced that couldn't have been running on a Snapdragon 888 or something. Like, a Tensor to me feels like it's fine. It's totally okay. But I'd be curious to see in a couple years from now if they go for something a little bit more ambitious versus if you handed me a Pixel and never told me what chip was inside of it, there would never have been a moment where I'm like, oh my God, this is fast. Oh my God, this is cool, in a way that I would not have thought about it if it was a Snapdragon 888 or something. Like, it's fine. It's good, but it's also not special, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems like Google's whole pitch, which I actually, the more I thought about it, I appreciate, is they were just saying, look, we're not going for power, we're going for what this allows. And, and fine. I mean, honestly, I can't see anything that, honestly, I don't see anything that they've shown that they couldn't have done on a Snapdragon. Like, I don't. Maybe eventually this will be good for them, but like the things that they're showing off, like in the, the Magic Eraser, right? Like everyone's like, oh, Magic Eraser, Magic Eraser. There are so many apps that do this.
Yep. Yep.
Like, I have apps on my iPad, my Mac do this great. Like, there are apps on Android that already do this great. It's awesome that it's built into the camera, but Google did not need to make their own chip so they could erase the stuff in images.
No, it's a flashy, good marketing thing. It's great for
Yeah.
TikToks, right? I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things that is probably a little bit of a bigger deal is that Tensor allows them to support their devices for longer, since they're not waiting for Qualcomm to, update their old chipset drivers for Android 16 or whatever. So there's that. But to me, Tensor is still more about the potential than anything else. On the flip side,
It's the start, right? It's the start.
They didn't mess it up, which they very easily could have. It could have been much worse.
True.
You could be looking at really weak CPU performance or whatever. There does seem to be a little bit of an issue with the display or the something. I was reading in a non-tech article. They were measuring like something about when you are like running at low brightnesses, the display, like the base, like sort of power usage of the display is very high, to the point where like. It's something to do with like the ambient light that it's pulling in and like how much like the driver is pulling. That's, I think, part of the reason why the battery life is less than optimal, especially considering that both of these phones have huge sort of cells. But I think when you put it together, like sort of like my general thoughts are like this. Like, I completely agree with you that it is a really subjective device. Like, it is not a simple, straightforward iPhone or Galaxy S22 update or something like that, right? Like, this is definitely Google trying very hard to make the Pixel mainstream. Now, for me personally, I don't like how big they are. Like, I actually spent more time using the Pixel 5 than I have on the Pixel 6, which, spoiler alert, the Z Flip's back in my pocket. But like the Pixel 5, at least because it was so small and because it felt so different, I like that phone, right? Like, I think it was obviously expensive and not super powerful, but there was definitely stuff I liked about the Pixel 5. The Pixel 6 Pro is fine, but not really that great. I think it's like, I would still probably buy an iPhone 13 Pro, or I would buy a cheaper like S21 like Pro or Ultra or something, or Plus or Ultra. I think the Pixel 6 is where it's at though. There's nothing else in that $600 price category that is so good in so many ways. It's easy to kind of poke holes in it when you compare it to $1,000 plus flagships. But when you consider the price tag of it and all the things that it does, really not too far off of those very expensive flagships, that I think is really where it shines. I think that they did a very good job. I think they can sell a lot of Pixel 6s. I just think that maybe this is a case where my expectations were very high, and it's pretty good. And Google talked a very big game about a lot of this stuff, but I think they set expectations a little too high and came close, but didn't quite hit everything. The good phones, Pixel 6 is, I would say, a great phone, but they also aren't going to light the world on fire. And I don't think it's going to make you go take your OnePlus or Samsung and throw it in the garbage.
Let me tell you about another show here on Relay FM you should check out. It's called Clockwise. Hosts Dan Moran and Micah Sargent invite two guests every week from a diverse pool of tech professionals and cover 4 tech topics in 30 minutes. Not a second more. They hard out at 30. Go to relay.fm/clockwise or search for Clockwise wherever you get your podcasts.